The Orient Express had never looked more beautiful than it did that night, nor more deceptive. Snow fell in thick, muffling spirals, transforming the Balkans into a white, soundless wilderness. The famous train, all polished mahogany, brass fittings, and discreet luxury, cut through the darkness like a floating palace. Inside, crystal lamps glowed softly, champagne glasses chimed, and well-dressed passengers congratulated themselves on being immune to the cold misery beyond the windows. It was just after midnight when the scream came. It did not travel far, only down the narrow corridor of the Calais coach, but it was sharp enough, desperate enough, to cut through conversation and silence alike. Doors opened. Heads appeared. Somewhere, a steward dropped a tray. Hercule Poirot, who had been standing at the small writing desk in his compartment, paused mid-sentence in a letter to an old acquaintance in Paris. His pen hovered, his moustaches, those famous moustaches, waxed to symmetrical perfection, twitched ever so slightly. Ah, he murmured to himself. Voile. Disorder. Captain Arthur Hastings, his longtime friend and occasional chronicler, emerged from the adjoining compartment a moment later, his expression already alert with curiosity. Poirot, did you hear? Yes, mon ami, I heard. Poirot set down his pen with care. And I fear it is not the kind of interruption one welcomes on a winter holiday. They stepped into the corridor together. Other passengers were already gathering, wrapped in silk dressing gowns and wool coats, their faces a mixture of concern and irritation. At the far end stood a pale young woman, one hand braced against the wall, her other pressed to her mouth as though she might be sick. It came from there, she whispered, pointing toward compartment No. 8. The steward, flustered and red-faced, pushed past the onlookers and knocked sharply on the compartment door. Monsieur? Madam? Is everything? There was no answer. The steward tried the handle. It did not move. Locked, he said, frowning. At this, Poirot's eyes sharpened. He stepped forward politely but firmly. If you permit, monsieur, he said. Perhaps we should summon the conductor. The conductor arrived within minutes, accompanied by another steward and an air of official concern. After a brief, murmured exchange, a master key was produced. The door opened. What greeted them was not chaos, but something far more unsettling. The compartment was immaculate. The bed was neatly made. The suitcase lay open, its contents carefully arranged. A single lamp glowed, casting warm light over a scene that should have suggested calm and order. Instead, a man lay slumped against the far wall, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, his eyes staring sightlessly at nothing. He was dead. The victim was identified quickly. His name, according to the passenger manifest, was Leonard Blackwood, a wealthy British industrialist known for his discreet influence, his guarded manners, and his refusal to discuss his past. He had boarded the train in Istanbul, traveling alone, and had spoken little to anyone beyond curt pleasantries. Now he sat in his locked compartment, stabbed once, precisely once, directly through the heart. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no weapon in sight. Snow continued to fall outside, heavier now, piling against the wheels of the train as though nature itself were determined to prevent escape. Within the hour, the train shuddered to a halt. A drift had blocked the tracks completely. Progress would be impossible until morning, perhaps longer. The Orient Express was stranded, and somewhere within its polished corridors, a murderer sat calmly among the passengers. Poirot stood very still inside compartment No. 8, his hands clasped behind his back, his head slightly inclined. He took in every detail, not with the frantic energy of a policeman hunting clues, but with the serene concentration of a man listening to a difficult piece of music. The door was locked from the inside, the conductor said. The window, see, open only a finger's width, Impossible for a man to pass through. Poirot nodded. And yet, monsieur, a man has passed, from this world to the next. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. It doesn't make sense. If no one could enter or leave... Ah, my friend, Poirot said gently, it makes perfect sense. It is only that we do not yet see how. The local authorities were unreachable. The nearest station lay miles away, buried beneath snow. Responsibility, like it or not, fell upon those aboard, and so it was that, by quiet consensus, eyes began to turn toward the small, impeccably dressed Belgian with the grave expression and the thoughtful gaze. The conductor cleared his throat. Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. If you would be willing... Poirot sighed softly, not with reluctance, but with sadness. I had hoped, he said, for a journey of rest, of symmetry, of good coffee and civilized conversation. He looked once more at the dead man, at the single wound, the stillness, the absence of disorder. But instead, he continued, we have a crime that pretends to be simple, and those are always the most dangerous. Outside, the snow deepened its grip. Inside the Orient Express, 12 passengers returned slowly to their compartments, each carrying private thoughts, private fears, and private memories they had never intended to share. Poirot watched them go. Already his little gray cells were at work. By morning, the snow had turned from inconvenience to imprisonment. Hastings awoke to an eerie stillness, the kind that presses against the ears. No rhythmic clatter of wheels, no distant whistle, only silence. Thick and absolute. When he pulled back the curtain, he saw nothing but white. The Orient Express lay half-buried, like a jewel locked inside ice. Breakfast was served late and without ceremony in the dining car. Conversation was subdued. Cups rattled faintly in nervous hands. Every passenger knew what had happened, though few spoke of it openly. Death, when confined within luxury, has a way of becoming more disturbing rather than less. Poirot arrived precisely on time, immaculately dressed as ever, his shoes polished despite the snow, his moustaches in perfect balance. He greeted Hastings with a nod and sat opposite him, folding his napkin with deliberate care. My friend, Poirot said softly, today we observe. Before Hastings could reply, the conductor approached, his expression tight with worry. Monsieur Poirot, if you are ready, perhaps it is best that we speak to the passengers together. All of them. Poirot inclined his head. Oui, it is necessary. A crime such as this, when the door is locked, when the train cannot move, it is what you call a closed world. Everyone within it matters. The dining car was cleared. Chairs were arranged in a careful semicircle. One by one, the passengers were invited to sit, each occupying a place that would soon take on greater significance than they realized. Poirot observed them with mild interest, as though they were guests at a dinner party rather than potential murderers. There was Mrs. Eleanor Whitefield, a tall, thin Englishwoman in her late 40s, dressed in severe black wool. Her posture was rigid, her lips pressed together, her eyes alert but guarded. Next to her sat Colonel James Ashcroft, retired military, broad-shouldered and stiff-backed, with a graying moustache and the unmistakable air of a man accustomed to command. Across from them was Madame Sophia Delacroix, a French opera patron with diamonds at her throat and sorrow in her eyes that seemed far older than her years. Beside her lounged Victor Novak, a young Czech aristocrat, handsome, restless, and visibly irritated by the inconvenience of delay. Further along sat Dr. Heinrich Vogel, a German physician, meticulously groomed, his spectacles catching the light as he adjusted them again and again with nervous precision. Near the window was Miss Clara Beaumont, scarcely more than 25, with a pale face and intelligent eyes that darted from one person to another as though cataloguing reactions. Finally, closest to Poirot himself, sat Samuel Reed, an American journalist, rumpled and sharp-eyed, a notebook already half hidden beneath his coat. 12 passengers in total, 12 separate lives, 12 private histories. Poirot rose. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm and polite. "You are no doubt aware of the unfortunate event that has occurred on this train. Until such time as the authorities can be reached, it is my duty, regrettable though it may be, to ask you certain questions." A murmur ran through the group. Colonel Ashcroft shifted impatiently. "This is all very irregular," he said. "Surely the conductor—" "With respect, Colonel," Poirot interrupted gently, "regular methods do not apply when the world is buried under snow." Silence followed. Poirot turned slightly, his gaze settling on Mrs. Whitefield. "Madame," he said, "you occupied the compartment adjacent to that of the deceased. Did you hear anything unusual during the night?" Mrs. Whitefield hesitated, just a fraction too long. "No," she said finally. "I sleep poorly, but I heard nothing." Poirot nodded, making no comment. "And you, Colonel Ashcroft?" "I was awake," the colonel replied briskly. "Reading. I heard a scream. That is all." "A scream," Poirot repeated mildly. "Yet you did not leave your compartment?" Ashcroft's jaw tightened. "I assumed it was a nightmare. People have them." Poirot thanked him and moved on. Madame Delacroix's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "I was awake also. I heard footsteps in the corridor earlier in the evening, but on a train footsteps mean nothing, do they?" "Sometimes," Poirot said softly. "They mean everything." Victor Novak scoffed. "This is absurd. We are being treated like criminals because of an accident." Poirot's eyes flicked toward him. "Monsieur, accidents do not lock doors from the inside." Novak flushed but said nothing more. One by one, Poirot questioned them, not aggressively, not suspiciously, but with gentle precision. He asked about routines, about sleep, about habits. He asked questions that seemed trivial, even irrelevant. Hastings noticed something curious. Poirot rarely looked at the speaker while they answered. Instead, his gaze drifted to hands, to posture, to the faint tightening of lips, or widening of eyes. When the last passenger had spoken, Poirot thanked them all and dismissed the gathering. As the dining car emptied, Hastings leaned closer. "You haven't accused anyone?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Of course not. That would be most premature, but surely you have some idea." "I have impressions," Poirot corrected. "Impressions are the seeds of ideas. One must water them carefully." They returned to compartment No. 8. The body had been left undisturbed, awaiting proper authority. Poirot stood once more before it, his expression grave. "One wound," Hastings said. "Clean, efficient." "Efficient, yes," Poirot agreed, "but also intimate." He gestured to the immaculate surroundings. "Notice, my friend. No struggle. No hesitation. The victim trusted the person who entered this room, or believed himself alone. But the door—" "Ah, the door," Poirot murmured. "It is a clever thing, the locked door. It distracts the mind. Makes one believe the mystery is mechanical." He straightened suddenly. "And yet," he said, "what interests me far more is not how the murderer entered, but why this man was killed now. On this train. Among these people." Hastings frowned. "You think it wasn't random?" Poirot gave him a look of gentle reproach. "My dear friend, murder is never random. It is always personal, even when it pretends not to be." Outside, the snow showed no sign of easing. Inside the Orient Express, the circle had closed, and within that circle, Poirot sensed not one secret, but many, layered carefully, waiting to be uncovered. The corridor outside compartment No. 8 smelled faintly of polish and cold metal. It was here, Poirot decided, that truth would begin. Not with accusations, Not with deductions announced too early, but with listening. Always listening. Today he said to Hastings, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous care, "We do not ask what happened. We ask who people believe themselves to be." Hastings nodded, though he was not entirely sure what Poirot meant. The first interview was conducted in the small lounge carriage, now repurposed as a temporary office. Poirot insisted on comfort. People, he believed, revealed themselves more readily when at ease. Mrs. Eleanor Whitefield. Mrs. Whitefield sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap as though clasped in prayer. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and defensive. "You say you heard nothing," Poirot began conversationally. "Yet you are a light sleeper." She inclined her head. "Yes." "And you did not leave your compartment at all during the night?" "No." Poirot smiled faintly. "Madame, forgive me, but you hesitate." Her lips thinned. "I am not accustomed to being interrogated." "Ah," Poirot said gently. "But this is not interrogation, it is conversation." A pause. "I did step into the corridor briefly," she admitted. "I could not sleep. I wished for water. At what time?" "I don't know. Perhaps 11. Poirot nodded. "Did you see anyone?" "No. Did anyone see you?" Mrs. Whitefield's eyes flickered. "I should think not." Poirot thanked her warmly, as though she had done him a kindness. When she had gone, Hastings whispered, "She lied at first." "Yes," Poirot replied, "but only a small lie. Often the small ones hide the larger truths. Colonel James Ashcroft." The colonel stood rather than sat, hands clasped behind his back like a man reporting for duty. "You heard the scream," Poirot said. "Yes, and yet you did nothing." Ashcroft bristled. "I have heard screams before, monsieur, on battlefields. One learns not to rush blindly." "Indeed," Poirot said. "And the victim, did you know him?" Ashcroft hesitated. "No." Poirot's eyes softened, not hardened. "Colonel, men who have lived as you have do not forget faces easily." Ashcroft's jaw worked. "I may have seen him once. Years ago, where? India or Egypt? I cannot recall." Poirot inclined his head. "Memory is a curious thing. It remembers what the heart prefers to forget." Madame Sophia Delacroix. Madame Delacroix wept quietly before Poirot even asked a question. "This whole thing, it is unbearable," she said. "To be trapped with death. You were awake late," Poirot noted. "Yes, I suffer from insomnia." "And the victim, did you speak with him during the journey?" "Yes," she said, dabbing her eyes. "Briefly. He was unpleasant." "In what way?" "He looked at me as though he knew me, as though he judged me." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And did he know you, madam?" Her hands tightened around her handkerchief. "No." The answer came too quickly. "Victor Novak." Novak sprawled in his chair, irritation written across his handsome features. "This is a waste of time," he said. "I was in my compartment all night." "Alone?" Poirot asked. "Of course." Poirot smiled. "Monsieur Novak, you are young. You are restless. You dislike confinement." Novak stiffened. "What has that to do with murder?" "Everything," Poirot said lightly. "Did you walk the corridors last night?" A pause. "Yes," Novak admitted. "I could not sleep." "And did you see anyone?" "No." Poirot thanked him and made a note, not on paper, but in his mind. Dr. Heinrich Vogel. Dr. Vogel answered each question carefully, precisely, like a man accustomed to examinations. "You found the wound clean," Poirot observed. "Yes. You are certain death was instantaneous?" "Almost." Poirot tilted his head. "Almost?" "There would have been seconds," Vogel said. "Enough to cry out." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet the scream was heard some distance away." "Yes, interesting," Poirot murmured. "Miss Clara Beaumont." Miss Beaumont surprised Hastings. She was calm, thoughtful. "I did not hear the scream," she said. "I was awake reading." Poirot studied her. "And you did not leave your compartment?" "No." Her gaze met his steadily. Too steadily. Poirot smiled politely. "Thank you, mademoiselle. Samuel Reed." The American journalist grinned without humor. "Hell of a story," he said. "Shame I can't file it. You knew the victim?" Poirot asked. Reed shrugged. "Knew of him. Blackwood wasn't as clean as he liked people to think. Did he have enemies?" Reed laughed softly. "Monsieur, men like that collect enemies the way others collect stamps." After the last interview, Poirot sat very still. Hastings broke the silence. "Well?" Poirot folded his hands. "They all told me the truth." Hastings blinked. "All of them?" "Yes," Poirot said serenely. "Each told me their truth." "And the lies?" Poirot smiled, a thin, thoughtful smile. "Ah, the lies are more interesting. They overlap." He rose and walked to the window. Snow pressed hard against the glass. "There is fear here," he said softly. "But not fear of being caught. Fear of being remembered." Hastings felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Somewhere on the train, Poirot knew, the first false certainty was already forming. And when it did, it would be very convincing indeed. By mid-afternoon, the train crew could no longer pretend calm. The snow showed no sign of relenting. Telegraph lines were down. The conductor paced like a man awaiting sentence. In the absence of outside authority, order demanded a substitute, and inevitably, suspicion began to crystallize. It began, as such things often do, with something convenient. A steward came to Poirot with hesitation written across his face. In his gloved hand he carried a small object wrapped carefully in cloth. "Monsieur," he said, lowering his voice, "this was found during a routine check of the washroom at the end of the carriage." Poirot unfolded the cloth. A narrow-bladed knife lay inside, its steel dulled, its handle plain and practical. Nothing ornate, nothing theatrical, but near the base of the blade was a faint reddish stain, almost invisible unless one looked closely. Poirot did not react. He merely nodded. "Who found this?" he asked. "I did," the steward replied. "But there is more." Poirot's eyes lifted. "The knife," the steward continued, "comes from the personal effects of Colonel Ashcroft. Military issue?" Hastings, who had been standing nearby, stiffened. "That's rather damning." Poirot said nothing. The colonel was summoned. Ashcroft entered the lounge carriage with controlled anger, his back straight, his expression set. "This is nonsense," he said when the knife was shown to him. "Yes, it is mine. I carried it for years, but I have not used it since the war. Can you account for its absence?" Poirot asked mildly. Ashcroft hesitated. "I did not know it was missing." "And where do you keep it?" "In my suitcase." "Unlocked?" "Yes." A silence followed. The logic was brutally simple. A military man. A blade designed for efficiency. A scream heard by him and ignored. Whispers spread quickly among the passengers. "That settles it," Victor Novak muttered to Madame Delacroix. "Soldiers kill. That's what they do." Mrs. Whitefield watched Ashcroft with narrowed eyes. Samuel Reed scribbled something discreetly in his notebook. Hastings felt uneasy. "It does fit," he admitted quietly to Poirot. "The wound was clean." "Precise." "Yes," Poirot agreed. "It fits." The colonel's temper flared. "I demand to be released from this farce. I will not be treated as a criminal on the basis of a misplaced tool." Poirot inclined his head politely. "Monsieur le Colonel, you are not accused. You are merely considered." Ashcroft left in fury. By evening the idea had taken hold. A man trained to kill. A weapon linked directly to him. A scream he heard and did nothing about. It was, Hastings had to admit, persuasive. That night Poirot and Hastings dined alone. The atmosphere in the carriages had grown heavy, as though the train itself were holding its breath. "You do not believe it," Hastings said finally. Poirot buttered his bread with exact precision. "Believe what, my friend?" "That Ashcroft did it." Poirot looked up. "Ah." You notice this. Well? Poirot chewed thoughtfully before answering. The knife is real. The opportunity exists. The temperament, perhaps. But the psychology? He shook his head gently. None. Why not? Because the Colonel is angry, Poirot said simply. Anger is loud. Guilt prefers silence. Later that night, Poirot asked the conductor for a small, peculiar favor. He requested that all passengers be informed, quietly, that the knife evidence would be handed over to authorities the moment the train moved again, and that Colonel Ashcroft would be detained until then. It was a calculated lie. Poirot waited. The reaction came sooner than expected. Just past midnight, a sharp knock echoed down the corridor. Hastings opened the door to find Dr. Vogel, pale and breathless. Monsieur Poirot, he said urgently, you must come at once. Something has happened. They hurried down the corridor. Colonel Ashcroft's compartment door stood open. Inside, the colonel lay unconscious on the floor, a deep gash across his forehead, blood dark against the carpet. A chair lay overturned nearby. A struggle? Hastings asked. No, Poirot said quietly. On the small table lay a folded note, written in a hurried hand. I cannot bear the injustice. I must escape this accusation. Hastings read it aloud. He tried to flee? Poirot shook his head slowly. No, my friend. He was meant to be found like this. He studied the wound, the angle, the force. This is not the act of a desperate man, Poirot continued. It is the staging of one. Hastings felt a chill. You mean... Yes, Poirot said softly. Someone wishes very much for us to stop looking further. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside the Orient Express, the first certainty had shattered, and in its place, something far more dangerous had begun to take shape. Colonel Ashcroft did not regain consciousness until morning. When he did, it was to find himself confined to his compartment under quiet watch, his head bandaged, his dignity wounded far more deeply than his flesh. Dr. Vogel assured everyone that the injury, while painful, was not serious. The blow had been carefully controlled, too carefully. Poirot thanked the doctor and remained behind after he left, standing very still as though listening to the echo of events rather than their substance. You see, Hastings, he said at last, this is what I call le jeu psychologique. Someone has begun to move the pieces. Hastings frowned. To make Ashcroft look guilty? No. To make him look finished. Poirot's eyes were thoughtful. A false ending is the most dangerous thing in a mystery. It tempts the mind to rest. Word of the attack spread quickly. Fear sharpened. The passengers, who had previously watched one another with polite distance, now avoided eye contact altogether. Doors remained closed. Conversations dropped to whispers. The killer, or killers, Poirot did not yet exclude the possibility, had changed tactics. And that meant pressure. Poirot requested another gathering, this time informal. Tea was served. Chairs were drawn closer together, not in accusation, but in forced intimacy. He said nothing of conclusions. Instead, he spoke of human behavior. When people feel trapped, Poirot said mildly, stirring his tea, they do not all react the same way. Some grow angry. Some grow silent. Some become helpful. His eyes drifted, one by one, across the faces before him. Mrs. Whitefield sat rigid, her gloved hands clenched in her lap. Madame Delacroix dabbed her eyes repeatedly, though no tears fell. Victor Novak leaned back, arms crossed, his foot tapping, a nervous rhythm. Dr. Vogel adjusted his spectacles, again and again. Miss Beaumont watched Poirot with almost scholarly interest. Samuel Reed looked amused, but his pen was absent. Poirot asked simple questions. Who last saw the Colonel before his injury? I did, said Victor Novak quickly. He was furious, ranting. Poirot nodded. And did he strike you as a man about to flee? Novak hesitated. No, but anger does not equal despair, Poirot finished gently. Poirot turned to Mrs. Whitefield. Madame, you were awake again last night? She stiffened. Yes, and you heard nothing? No. Poirot smiled politely and moved on. The real tension came when he addressed Dr. Vogel. Monsieur le Docteur, Poirot said, you told me yesterday that death would not have been instantaneous. Yes. That the victim would have had seconds. Enough to cry out, yes. And yet the scream was heard not in his compartment, but farther down the corridor. Dr. Vogel blinked. Sound travels. Indeed, Poirot agreed. But screams, true screams, do not politely wait their turn. A silence settled. Poirot leaned back. I believe, he said calmly, that the scream did not come from the victim at all. Several passengers gasped. Hastings stared. Then who? Poirot did not answer. That night Poirot walked the train alone. He observed the angles of the corridor, the distances between compartments, the subtle timing of the heating system's clicks and sighs. He paused at doors. He noted which were locked, which were not. Above all, he listened. In the early hours, a soft sound reached him. Footsteps. Careful. Measured. Unhurried. Poirot did not follow immediately. He waited, counted the seconds, let the sound fade. Then he smiled. The next morning brought a discovery. In the washroom near compartment No. 8, Hastings found Poirot examining something small and seemingly insignificant. A handkerchief lay tucked behind the radiator. It was monogrammed. Not with initials, but with a single symbol, a small embroidered lily. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Do you know what this is, Hastings? A handkerchief. Non, Poirot said softly. It is a mistake. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Later that day, Samuel Reed approached Poirot privately. You know something, the journalist said quietly. I can see it. Poirot smiled. Monsieur Reed, knowledge is like snow. It must fall evenly, or it reveals footprints. Reed hesitated. Blackwood wasn't who he claimed to be. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Explain. Reed lowered his voice. Years ago there was a scandal, a ruined family, a man who vanished before justice could be done. Poirot listened without interruption. When Reed finished, Poirot nodded slowly. Merci, he said. This confirms a suspicion. That evening, Poirot wrote several letters, but sealed none of them. The game had entered its most delicate phase. The murderer believed the danger had passed. That belief, Poirot knew, would soon betray them, because the truth, once glimpsed, does not remain hidden for long. By the 6th day of their confinement, the snow had become less an obstacle than a presence. An unseen listener pressed against every window. It altered the behavior of the passengers subtly but unmistakably. Politeness thinned. Nerves showed through the cracks. Poirot welcomed this. Pressure, he told Hastings quietly as they walked the length of the carriage, is the great revealer. Diamonds and deceptions, both are made visible by it. He began this phase not with questions, but with facts. The first concerned the victim's identity. Leonard Blackwood, Poirot now knew, was not a name chosen at birth. Samuel Reed's information, cautiously verified through conversation rather than documents, pointed to a man who had once operated under another name. One connected to financial ruin, a vanished inheritance, and a suicide that had been officially deemed an accident. A man does not change his name, Poirot said, unless he wishes to escape a memory. Hastings frowned. So Blackwood had enemies. Oui. But more important, he had witnesses. Poirot resumed his interviews, this time privately, and with an entirely different tone. Madame Delacroix revisited. Poirot received her in the lounge, curtains drawn, light softened. "You told me," Poirot said gently, "that the victim looked at you as though he knew you." Her fingers twisted in her handkerchief. "Yes, and now I ask you again, madam, did he?" A long pause. "Yes," she whispered, "from many years ago. He ruined my brother." "How?" "He testified falsely. My brother lost everything. He drowned himself 2 months later." Poirot nodded. "And you boarded this train knowing Blackwood would be here?" "Yes." "Did you intend to kill him?" Madame Delacroix met his gaze, tears streaming freely now. "I wished him to suffer, not to die." Poirot rose and bowed. "Merci for your honesty, Miss Clara Beaumont." Miss Beaumont greeted Poirot with composed curiosity. "You are very calm," Poirot observed. "I have learned to be," she replied. "You were awake when the scream was heard?" "Yes, and yet you did not react." "I believed it to be staged," she said evenly. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Staged?" "Yes. Blackwood enjoyed manipulation." "Drama. Did you know him before?" She hesitated, then nodded. "He was once my guardian." Poirot absorbed this in silence. "He controlled my inheritance," she continued, "and lost it through poor investments. Did you confront him?" "Yes, 2 nights before his death." Poirot thanked her and watched her leave, noting the absence of fear. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitefield." Mrs. Whitefield did not sit when Poirot entered her compartment. "You are going to accuse me," she said coldly. Poirot smiled sadly. "Non, I am going to remember you." She stiffened. "You lost a son," Poirot said softly. "A promising young man. He worked for Blackwood." Her face drained of color. "He was dismissed," Poirot continued. "Ruined. He took his own life." Mrs. Whitefield's composure fractured at last. "He deserved it," she whispered. "He deserved everything." Poirot bowed his head. "Grief does not fade. It only learns to dress well, Dr. Vogel." The doctor was last. "You understand the mind," Poirot said. "You treat wounds others cannot see." Vogel adjusted his spectacles. "I try." "You altered your testimony," Poirot said calmly. "I did not." "You did," Poirot replied. "Not in facts, but in emphasis." A pause. "You knew Blackwood under another name," Poirot continued. "A man who financed unethical experiments." Vogel's jaw tightened. "Yes, and yet you did not kill him, no." Poirot studied him. "But you would protect the one who did." Vogel said nothing. That evening, Poirot gathered Hastings. The motive, Hastings said, overwhelmed, applies to almost all of them. "Precisely," Poirot replied, "which is why motive alone is useless." "And the handkerchief? The lily?" Poirot smiled faintly. "A symbol of mourning, but also of membership." Hastings stared. "You mean?" "Yes," Poirot said quietly. "This was not an act of passion. It was an act of agreement." Outside, the wind howled. Inside, Poirot prepared the final movement of his symphony. Tomorrow he would assemble them all. And the truth, long buried beneath false names, false endings, and shared grief, would finally be allowed to breathe. The dining car was arranged with almost ceremonial precision. Chairs were placed equidistant around the long table. Lamps were adjusted so that no face lay in shadow. Poirot himself supervised every detail, smoothing a wrinkle here, straightening a chair there, until the scene satisfied his sense of balance. "Symmetry," he said quietly to Hastings, "is not merely aesthetic. It is moral. When all stand equal, truth has no place to hide." One by one, the passengers entered, drawn by the conductor's summons and an unspoken understanding that something decisive was about to occur. Mrs. Whitefield sat with her chin lifted defiantly. Madame Delacroix clutched her handkerchief like a talisman. Victor Novak attempted nonchalance, but failed. Dr. Vogel looked tired, older somehow. Miss Beaumont's expression was calm, almost resigned. Samuel Reed took a seat near the end, observant, silent. When all were seated, Poirot remained standing. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I thank you for your patience. We have been trapped together by snow, but not by chance." A ripple of unease passed through the group. "You believe," Poirot continued, "that this crime concerns a locked door, a missing knife, a scream in the night. These are decorations. The true structure lies elsewhere." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the empty chair that symbolized Leonard Blackwood. "This man," Poirot said softly, "was murdered not because of what he did that night, but because of what he did years ago." Mrs. Whitefield inhaled sharply. Poirot raised a hand. "I accuse no one yet. I explain." He paced slowly as he spoke. Blackwood lived under an assumed name. He had reason. Wherever he went, ruin followed. Careers ended. Families collapsed. Lives were lost, not through violence, but through cold manipulation. He stopped behind Miss Beaumont. "And each of you," he said gently, "had cause to remember him." Victor Novak leapt in. "That proves nothing. Many had motive." "Just so," Poirot replied, "which is why motive alone misleads." Poirot turned to Hastings. "Tell me, my friend, what was peculiar about the wound?" "It was precise," Hastings replied. "One clean strike. Oui. And delivered by someone who did not hesitate." Poirot looked around the table. Not the hand of a man in rage, nor of a man acting alone. He picked up a folded paper from his pocket. "This," he said, "is a schedule. The Orient Express timetable." Confusion spread. "Why does this matter?" Novak demanded. "Because," Poirot said, "on this train, time itself became the accomplice." He explained, slowly, carefully. The heating system cycled at predictable intervals. The doors, though appearing locked, could be opened and closed silently during pressure shifts when adjacent compartments were accessed in sequence. The screen, heard but misplaced, had been deliberately timed during such a moment. Hastings felt his breath catch. "You mean," he said slowly, "the screen wasn't the victim's, and the door wasn't truly locked?" "Exactly," Poirot replied. "It was shared illusion." Poirot's gaze sharpened. The murder required cooperation. Each participant provided a piece, nothing damning on its own. He raised one finger. One provided access, another. One provided the timing, another. One provided the weapon, borrowed, not owned, another. One provided the scream. Gasps echoed around the table. Madame Delacroix's hand trembled violently now. Poirot's voice softened. "No single person here committed murder in the traditional sense. And yet, all are responsible." Silence fell, heavy, suffocating. "You formed an unspoken compact," Poirot continued, "not one of hatred but of justice denied." He withdrew the handkerchief with the embroidered lily. "This symbol," he said, "appears in each of your belongings. A flower of mourning. A sign you recognized in one another." Miss Beaumont closed her eyes. Samuel Reed spoke at last. "They planned it together." Poirot nodded. "Yes, and they planned it so that no one could be condemned alone." Colonel Ashcroft, bandaged but upright, stepped forward from the doorway. "I was meant to be the scapegoat," he said bitterly. Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, your anger made you useful." Poirot straightened, his expression solemn. "Mes amis," he said, "I will not pretend this is simple. The law prefers a single hand to place in irons. But truth is more demanding." He folded his hands. The authorities will arrive soon. What happens next depends on you." No one spoke, but in that silence, Hastings understood. Poirot had uncovered the heart of the crime and chosen, deliberately, not yet to strike. The final judgment still waited, and when it came, it would test not only guilt, but mercy itself. The silence that followed Poirot's last words was not empty. It was crowded, thick with memory, with restrained emotion, with years of injustice pressing against the present moment. No one moved. Even the hum of the train's systems seemed to retreat, as though unwilling to intrude. Hastings felt it keenly, the peculiar sensation that the mystery had been solved, yet the matter itself remained unresolved. Poirot allowed the stillness to breathe. He understood its value. Silence, after all, was the final language of conscience. At last, Mrs. Eleanor Whitefield spoke. "You cannot truly mean," she said, her voice steady but hollow, "that we are all murderers." Poirot turned to her, his expression gentle rather than accusatory. "Madam," he said softly, "the law asks for definitions. The heart asks for understanding. I speak to neither yet, I merely describe what is." Victor Novak pushed back his chair abruptly. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You are accusing us without evidence. There is no proof any of us entered that compartment." Poirot nodded. Individually, no. He moved slowly around the table, his steps measured. But together, he continued, "You form a pattern. Patterns do not require fingerprints. They require coherence." Dr. Vogel removed his spectacles and cleaned them with unnecessary care. "You are suggesting," the doctor said quietly, "that the act itself was divided." "Oui," Poirot replied. "Fragmented. Each action harmless in isolation. Each conscience reassured." Madame Delacroix's voice trembled. "We did not plan it as murder." Poirot stopped behind her chair. "Of course not," he said. "You planned it as justice." That word hung in the air like smoke. Samuel Reed leaned forward. "You said earlier the scream didn't come from the victim. Who?" Poirot's eyes flicked toward Miss Beaumont. She did not look away. "Yes," she said calmly, "it was me." Gasps rippled through the room. "I screamed from the far end of the corridor," she continued, "at the moment agreed upon. I have a good voice. I trained once." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Opera studies. Abandoned." Miss Beaumont nodded. "After Blackwood." Hastings felt his throat tighten. Poirot gestured gently. "And the timing?" Victor Novak exhaled sharply. "That was mine." All eyes turned to him. "I walked the corridor repeatedly," Novak said. "I knew when the heating cycle masked sound. I knew when doors could be opened without attention." Poirot added quietly, "A restless man is never noticed for restlessness." Mrs. Whitefield's gloved hands trembled. "And the knife?" Hastings asked, unable to stop himself. Dr. Vogel closed his eyes. "I suggested the instrument," the doctor said. "Not the act. I knew what kind of wound would look. Singular." Poirot's gaze was kind. "A doctor knows how to limit suffering." The colonel's voice broke in, bitter. "And I was to be blamed." Poirot nodded. "Your anger, your history, your knife, it was all too convenient. That is why the second attack was staged." To fix the narrative, Colonel Ashcroft laughed once, harshly. "Damn clever." Poirot returned to his place at the head of the table. "And yet," he said quietly, "there is one detail you did not anticipate." The passengers stiffened. "The final act," Poirot continued, "was meant to pass unnoticed. A single wound. No struggle. A man dying without resistance." He leaned forward. But Blackwood resisted. Madame Delacroix gasped. "No. Yes," Poirot said firmly. "Not physically. Psychologically," he explained. When the final participant entered his compartment, Blackwood recognized them. He understood. In that moment, fear replaced arrogance. Poirot paused. "That fear," he said, "broke your symmetry." Miss Beaumont swallowed. "He said my name." Poirot nodded. "And so the wound, though precise, was delayed." Enough to require the scream. Enough to create error. Hastings understood now. The handkerchief, he said softly. The lily. Poirot smiled faintly. Grief leaves traces. Mrs. Whitefield stood suddenly. My son died because of that man, she said, her voice cracking at last. He walked free. Free? What were we meant to do, wait? Poirot met her gaze without judgment. No, he said. You were meant to live. The words struck harder than any accusation. Silence returned, this time broken by quiet weeping. Poirot allowed it. He did not interrupt. He knew when his role was complete. At length, Samuel Reed spoke again. The authorities will come, he said. They'll want names. Yes, Poirot agreed. And you, Reed said carefully, you could give them one. Poirot folded his hands. I could, he said. But I will not. Shock spread instantly. Hastings turned. Poirot. Poirot raised a hand gently. The law, he said, is not a machine. It is an agreement between people. And sometimes, that agreement has already failed. He looked around the table. This man, he continued, indicating the empty chair, escaped justice once through manipulation. I will not allow his shadow to claim more lives now, Dr. Vogel whispered. You will lie. Poirot shook his head. None. I will choose, he straightened. Every inch the composed gentleman. I will tell the authorities, Poirot said calmly, that Leonard Blackwood was killed by an unknown intruder who escaped during the snowbound delay. That evidence was inconclusive. That suspicion fell nowhere firmly. Hastings stared. And them? Poirot's gaze softened. They will live with the truth. That is punishment enough. Mrs. Whitefield sank back into her chair. You condemn us to memory, she whispered. Poirot nodded. We. Outside, the wind began to ease. Snow fell more gently now, as though the world itself were releasing its breath. Poirot gathered his papers and stood. This is not absolution, he said quietly. It is restraint. He paused at the doorway and turned back one last time. Justice, he said, is not always about punishment. Sometimes it is about preventing further harm. He left the dining car without another word. Hastings followed slowly, his mind reeling. The mystery was solved. The truth was known, and yet no one would ever speak of it again. Except, perhaps, in silence. Morning arrived without ceremony. The snow had finally loosened its grip, retreating in slow, reluctant drifts as though conceding defeat. Outside the windows, men in heavy coats worked methodically at the tracks. The Orient Express, wounded but unbroken, prepared to move again. Inside, the passengers waited. Poirot had asked, politely, firmly, that they gather once more in the dining car. Not for accusation, he said, but for closure. The word carried weight. No one refused. They took their seats in near silence. Faces that had once been guarded now showed exhaustion, and something deeper, relief laced with dread. What had been done could not be undone. What had been revealed could not be forgotten. Poirot entered last. He looked smaller somehow, less theatrical than usual, as though the case had cost him something personal. Still, his suit was immaculate, his moustaches perfectly balanced. Order, at least, remained. Mesdames et messieurs, he began quietly. This will be the last time we speak of this matter together. No one interrupted. The train will soon depart, Poirot continued. At the next station, officials will board. They will ask questions. I will answer them. A faint tightening passed through the group. But before that, Poirot said, it is necessary, ethically, if not legally, that I complete the reasoning. Not for them. For you. He gestured to Hastings. My friend will listen. He always does. You may also listen. Or you may not. That choice is yours. Poirot walked slowly to the far end of the car and turned. When I first saw the crime scene, he said, I was struck not by violence, but by restraint. The compartment was orderly, too orderly. Violence leaves disorder, unless it is controlled. He let the idea settle. The locked door was a temptation. It invites mechanical solutions. Keys, windows, acrobatics. Poirot shook his head, but the true lock was not on the door. It was on your consciences. Mrs. Whitefield closed her eyes. You were bound, Poirot continued, not by affection, but by parallel suffering. Each of you had been wronged by the same man. Separately, you were powerless. Together, you were decisive. He moved along the table, his gaze resting briefly on each face. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. No single killer. No single motive. Each participant carried only a fraction of guilt. Small enough, you believed, to be bearable. Victor Novak's jaw tightened. The timing, Poirot said, was the key. You used the rhythm of the train itself, the heating cycles, the expected noises, to create moments of invisibility. Poirot stopped near Dr. Vogel. The wound was chosen for its symbolism. One strike. Final. Clinical. Not a crime of anger, but of resolution. Poirot turned to Madame Delacroix. The scream was a misdirection, a sound to displace the mind, to pull attention away from truth and toward confusion. Miss Beaumont stared at the table, her hands folded tightly. And finally, Poirot said, the scapegoat. He looked toward Colonel Ashcroft, who met his gaze steadily now. A man whose history made him believable as a killer, whose temperament could be provoked, whose anger would do the rest. Poirot inhaled slowly. It was, he said, a masterpiece of shared responsibility. Silence followed. Hastings felt the weight of it settle over him. Not admiration, not approval, but recognition of terrible intelligence. Poirot straightened, and yet he said, it failed. Several heads lifted. It failed, Poirot repeated, because of one thing you could not eliminate. He tapped his chest lightly. Fear. Poirot's voice softened. Blackwood recognized the final visitor. In that recognition, he understood what you were, not avengers, not judges, but mirrors. Poirot paused. And mirrors terrify those who live by illusion. Miss Beaumont's breath caught audibly. That moment, Poirot continued, introduced hesitation. And hesitation introduces error. The scream came too late. The door locked too cleanly. The handkerchief was forgotten. He withdrew the lily-embroidered cloth and laid it gently on the table. A symbol meant to unite you became the signature of your unity. Poirot folded his hands. I tell you this, he said, not to punish you, but to free you from uncertainty. You will not wonder anymore whether I know. He looked at them, truly looked. I know. The train gave a low, distant groan as the engine engaged. Movement. The Orient Express lived again. Footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, railway officials preparing to board. Madame Delacroix spoke, her voice barely audible. And you will truly say nothing? Poirot considered her carefully. I will say what preserves the most order, he replied. Sometimes that is truth, sometimes restraint. Mrs. Whitefield whispered, my son. I know, Poirot said gently. And I am sorry. He turned toward Hastings. Come, my friend. Our role here is finished. As they reached the door, Samuel Reed spoke one last time. You'll carry this with you, the journalist said. Doesn't it trouble you? Poirot paused. Yes, he said simply. It does. He looked back at them all. But justice without humanity, Poirot continued, is only another form of cruelty. I have seen enough of that. The door closed behind him. Hastings followed, the soft click echoing louder than any accusation. Behind them, the passengers remained seated, free, condemned, and bound forever by a truth that would never be spoken aloud. Ahead, the train began to move, and with it, the world resumed, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred at all. The Orient Express pulled away from the station with a sigh that sounded almost like relief. Steam curled into the pale morning air as the train gathered speed, the rhythm of the wheels returning, steady, reassuring, deceptively normal. Snow-dulled fields slid past the windows, marked now by tracks that would soon be filled again by falling white, as though the land itself wished to erase all evidence of interruption. Hastings stood by the window in silence. His reflection ghosted faintly in the glass. Behind him, Poirot sat at the small table, pouring coffee with the same careful precision he applied to everything else. The cup was placed exactly at the center of the saucer. The spoon lay parallel to the edge, order restored, at least on the surface. After a long while, Hastings spoke. "You've done this before," he said quietly. "Chosen restraint, I mean." Poirot did not look up. "Oui, and it never sits easily with you." Poirot's mouth curved in a small, rueful smile. "None," Hastings turned. "Do you ever wonder whether that makes you judge as much as detective?" Poirot stirred his coffee once, no more, no less. "I wonder," he said, "whether there is truly a difference." They drank in silence as the train rolled on. At the next major station, uniformed officials boarded, stamping boots and smelling faintly of cold iron and tobacco. Questions were asked. Poirot answered them politely, concisely, with impeccable logic and just enough uncertainty to ensure nothing could be proven. A locked compartment. No clear suspect. A train immobilized by snow. Evidence compromised. Conclusions inconclusive. The officials were not pleased, but they were satisfied enough. Leonard Blackwood's body was removed. Paperwork was signed. Condolences were expressed without much feeling. And then, just like that, the law stepped off the train. As the platform slipped away behind them, Hastings exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. "That's it," he said. "It's over." Poirot looked out the window, his eyes distant. "For the law," he said. "Yes." Hastings hesitated. "And for you?" Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the lily-embroidered handkerchief. He studied it briefly, then folded it with care and placed it inside an envelope. "What will you do with that?" Hastings asked. Poirot sealed the envelope and addressed it simply. "To be forgotten. I will leave it," he said, "in a place where no one will look for meaning." Later that afternoon, Hastings encountered several of the passengers in the corridor. Mrs. Whitefield passed him without meeting his eyes, her face composed, her grief now internalized and permanent. Madame Delacroix paused, her hand hovering uncertainly before she inclined her head, a gesture of gratitude, perhaps, or farewell. Victor Novak stared out a window, restless still, but older somehow. Dr. Vogel moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who would never again confuse healing with justification. Miss Beaumont sat alone, reading, her voice once capable of filling opera houses now contained within her chest. None of them spoke. They did not need to. That evening, Poirot and Hastings dined privately. "I keep thinking," Hastings said slowly, "about what you said, that justice without humanity becomes cruelty." Poirot nodded. "And yet," Hastings continued, "there's a danger in what we did, in letting people decide such things for themselves." "Yes," Poirot agreed. "There is." He set down his fork. "But there is also danger in pretending the world is simpler than it is." Hastings looked at him. "Would you do it again?" Poirot considered this carefully. "I hope," he said at last, "that I will never again be placed in such a position." He smiled faintly. "But if I am, I will listen to my little grey cells, and to my heart." In that order, night fell. The Orient Express cut through darkness once more, its windows glowing like beads of amber strung across the landscape. Inside, life resumed its accustomed patterns: reading, writing, sleeping, forgetting. In his compartment, Poirot sat at his writing desk and composed a letter. It was brief. "My friend, I have been reminded that truth is not always a weapon. Sometimes it is a burden. I remain as ever, your devoted servant of order, though I now suspect order must occasionally bend, lest it break." He signed his name with a flourish and sealed the envelope. Hastings watched him. "You'll never speak of this case again," he said. Poirot smiled gently. "On the contrary, my friend, I will think of it often." He extinguished the lamp. "For it is the cases we do not close with handcuffs," Poirot added softly, "that leave the deepest fingerprints." The train raced on through the night. By morning, the snow would be gone. By evening, the passengers would scatter back into their separate lives, and somewhere, in the quiet symmetry of his mind, Hercule Poirot would file away another truth about human nature. Neat, painful, and perfectly balanced. The case was finished, but its echo would endure.